Tonight, how would you assess the performance of those who sit around the Stormont Castle table? What would their Christmas report card look like? We've assembled a panel of experts to assess their actions, targets and ambitions. Plus, the view from the outside in. 3 former politicians give us their verdicts. I know 2024 was the year that devolved government returned to Northern Ireland. As it's our final programme of the year, we thought we'd ask how it's performed. Over the past few months, we've heard from several members of the executive, and rest assured, we have asked to speak to all of them. Here's a reminder of those who did accept the invitation.
Hugely disappointing in relation to the Casement Park not being built in time for the Euros. Such a missed opportunity economically, but also for local football. I think what we need to see now from the British government is them honouring their commitment to funding Casement Park and for them to put their money on the table. And I would also urge them to reflect over the past couple of days and how things have played out. And maybe we need a bit of a reset on the reset.
30 years. There's decades in the making, decades in the fixing. So I think it's really, really important in politics to be honest with people. Now, if Lough Neagh, and as you said, other situations in terms of Lough Erne and other places where blue-green algae has emerged, is not a wake-up call for anyone in Northern Ireland, and I don't know what else is.
And I have to say myself, I've been an executive a number of times, there is more collaborative working on this executive than I've ever seen in any previous executive. And part of that is that we have very restricted finances, and we know that if we're to try and spread that thin resource and be as effective as we possibly can, then we have to collaborate with each other, we have to work together.
And that's one of several things which I can assure you in the department there are potentially frosty conversations about the speed at which we are transforming and making things better.
Whenever I met with the LCC, they indicated their desire to be helping in terms of educational underachievement. They outlined a particular project called Bright Sparks, which operates in an area in Belfast with some schools, and it's to help those young people.
They're not educational experts, are they?
No, but they want communities to have education, and that was the basis on which they came.
But I also want to ensure that NI Water is delivering an efficient, effective service, not only to the general public, but also to the developers you talk about, and we're ensuring that we're not putting unnecessary restrictions in the way of future development, whether that's social homes, other homes, or our industries and businesses that are out there.
Just some of the issues we discussed with a range of Stormont ministers over recent months, and we do hope to hear from the rest of the ministerial team in the new year. Well, let's discuss how the executive and its individual ministers have performed since February. I'm joined by Deirdre Heenan, Professor of Public Policy at Ulster University, the Federation of Small Businesses Policy Chair Tina McKenzie, Andrew Webb is the Chief Economist at Grant Thornton, and Claire Guinness is the Chief Executive of the Belfast Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us on the programme tonight. Deirdre Heenan, first of all, Stormont returned back in February. Are we better off now than we were this time last year?
Well, I think it is important to say, Mark, that it is important for the optics that we have a government and we have two people that seem to work well together, and that's an important foundation. The difficulty is that's not enough. Just existing is not enough. We are at the point now where we really need to see some delivery, and so far it has been profoundly disappointing. We waited for 6 months for a programme for government, and it came straight from the Ladybird book of waffle. I mean, it was just words on a page, utterly meaningless, and many people were genuinely disappointed to see 9 priorities. One of them, for example, waiting lists. Waiting lists is not a priority. Waiting lists is a symptom of a health and social care system that is not working, but no plan to say how it would be fixed. Just this week we've had a 3-year plan for health, and again we've had reform of bowels, breast cancer, we've had reform of almost every part of the system. Will you be as well saying you're going to reform the G7, the UN Security Council, the EU, NATO? it's meaningless. It's not going to happen. And I think when people see that, they think, why can't we have policy that is strategic? Why couldn't our health minister say, for example, look, I'm going to fix waiting lists and GPs? Because if they are fixed, that's a foundation. It's something that's doable. It'll give him confidence and give us confidence that he can actually deliver something.
But the minister and his department might say there are targets in the plan, maybe not as many as you would like, but there are targets there. We haven't got time to list them all. But it is hard to be overly specific when there is no multi-year budget in place. That's why we're different from some of the other jurisdictions you're referencing.
I don't accept that, Mark, because if we can continually say we have no money, that's the excuse. If it's not the British government and it's not Brexit and it's not austerity, it's that we don't have enough money.
It's not about no money. Hang on, Drew. It's not about having no money. It's about not knowing how much money you have next year and the year after that and the year after that, which is what allows you to plan strategically.
Well,
and if you don't know what's coming down the tracks, how can you make those plans?
I don't accept that. I mean, for example, when you have a wage, you take out a mortgage for 25 years, we will get a block grant from government next year and there will be a percentage increase for inflation. Of course you can plan for the future. What they are not accepting they need to do is say, how are we spending this money? We are spending 51% of the block grant on health and social care. Are they seriously telling us that they couldn't find efficiencies? I know Grant Thornton have talked long term about efficiencies within the system, productivity, processes.
Okay.
We are over-administered and under-managed, and that is a problem that they are unwilling to grasp.
OK, well, let me just bring Andrew Webb in at this point, because it'd be interesting to get your perspective as an economist about whether or not the whole idea of there not being multi-annual budgets in place is overplayed by some people or not.
I do think it's overplayed, actually.
Because you hear it an awful lot.
Well, we hear it loads, and I mean, it will be better to have multi-year budgets. I think that does help with strategic planning. But I mean, I've made the point before. I go to Dublin a lot, and they have more money than they know what to do with, and are being told not to spend as much, and they have very similar issues. So you come to the conclusion it's not just about money, and it has to be about delivering better. And when we think about, since the executive came back, the programme for government, as Deirdre said, took an age to come out and opened with, we promised you opportunity and hope. And if that's what we're marking them on, well, then they're failing pretty miserably on that measure.
You talk about delivering better. Just before I bring our other guests in, is that about shortcomings in terms of political leadership or public service delivery, or both?
It's both. We're not delivering efficiently and effectively, and we're not grasping the difficult things that we need to grasp and our political leaders aren't making those decisions or implementing anything at pace. There's so many things that need to be improved and so many decisions that could start to make us better at what we do, and they're not doing it.
Tina McKenzie, should we be able to, in your view, deliver better with the resources currently available to us?
Absolutely, no doubt.
So why are we not able to do
and
that?
This idea that you can only do it, I agree with Deirdre and Andrew, that you can only look for 1 year ahead. In business, we write 5-year plans. We don't know what the economy is going to do. We don't know necessarily what revenues or costs we're going to have. But you must plan and you must have detail and you must have serious plans. The programme for government does not have targets or timelines on the most important things. And that is really disappointing, because if you don't have targets and timelines, how can you manage how well you've actually achieved and where you need to potentially make some changes? Now, for me, what was really, you have to say the executive started off well, and something that does go well. I was in the room in Washington when Michelle and Emma put on a really good show out to the outside world, and everybody was behind them. We need that type of stability and joined up government to sell Northern Ireland. Now, from then, the programme for government, as Andrew said, took way too long. There's not the specifics in there. But more importantly for me, it's what's missing from it.
We have had stability.
There's a lot of apple pie inside this programme for government. And honey, there's not a lot of other ambition. And let me give you 2 examples. Nowhere here does it mention corporation tax, right? They've all agreed that they're happy to decrease corporation tax so we can compete with the Republic of Ireland. 37 billion is the receipts of the Republic of Ireland that they will get this year that we could be doing with a slice of that to help our public services. But there's not even mentioned. I can't believe it. The second thing they don't mention, they've just had a vote on it yesterday, and they've all mentioned it for hours yesterday in the debating chamber. Not one word about the Windsor Framework. Selling to 27 countries countries plus one, GB, 28 countries. Our exports are doing well. Actually, there's something that's going well. Going south, going into Europe, those exports are doing well. We've got problems, GB, to Northern Ireland. Now, Keir Starmer is about to take a group of people. 100 civil servants have been seconded into a new department. They're about to go to Europe and they're going to renegotiate the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Where are we in all of that? Because we could be front and centre for Northern Ireland and make sure we solve some of the problems we have with the framework.
Corporation tax is a debate that's been going on here for a very long time, and there was a lot of hope put into it many, many years ago, and it went precisely nowhere. And it's worth pointing out that back in February, Conor Murphy, the Economy Minister, said there were no plans to cut corporation tax. So it's not on the agenda at the moment.
Well, here's the thing. No, now wait. Here's the thing. They don't want to put it on the agenda if it's going to come off the block grant. Now, here's the thing that they can do. And Kiva Archibald has actually done a good job going to those meetings with Rachel Reeves in London. They can negotiate directly with the Chancellor, and they need to be able to say, we need a window. As Deirdre talks about a mortgage, when you go in and buy a business, you don't pay it back in the first year out of your P&L. They need a window in order to get those receipts in. And I think the Chancellor would be up for negotiating that with them.
Yeah, well, difficulty negotiating with the Chancellor, as you know very well. I mean, it's fine to go in to say what you want, but you very often come out without it, and a lot of our politicians know that.
You should try.
Yeah, you can't fault people for trying, but just because you want it doesn't mean you're going to get it. Claire Guinness, is part of the problem maybe that our politicians want to be popular? They don't want to risk public support, and that's why so often they seem to be unprepared to take the difficult decisions that people like yourselves say they need to take.
Perhaps, I mean, I suppose I don't think I'd be just as negative as some of the other panellists in terms of, if we think where we were last year, we were nowhere. You know, to have a functioning government is brilliant. And I think...
So are you, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I mean, are you saying that it's not perfect, but it's not as bad as it might have been if we hadn't got devolution back in February?
I just think it's progress, Mark. You know, we've got this.
How do you measure that? How do you measure that progress? I mean, yes, we do have devolution. The question is it delivering tangibly for people in Northern Ireland? Can you point to examples of that?
Well, the fiscal framework getting agreed was big progress. I mean, that's actually putting considerable additional funding into the economy. So I think that was a big success.
OK, and you had a meeting, I think you're happy to say, with the Infrastructure Minister, John O'Dowd, today, without spilling any state secrets. Was that a useful conversation? Did you feel that he was listening to what you were saying? I mean, I presume you were talking about traffic congestion in Belfast and the impact that's having on your membership.
We were, and we were talking about wider issues too. But I suppose it was largely around congestion, and I couldn't have done that last year. I had nobody to approach, I had nobody to go to, I had nobody to say, sort this out. I think that's progress.
OK, but you had the meeting. The question is, does anything come out of the meeting?
Well, let's see what he does next week. I think it was...
Well, did he say what he might do?
He did. He gave a few solutions that he's seriously going to consider, and I hope he does something this side of Christmas. There's just 13 shopping days left until Christmas. We've got retailers and leisure and tourism operators all crying out for some help with this congestion issue, and the Minister was certainly very open to suggestions today and seemed to be positive and biased towards action. So let's see if he does. I don't know what he's going to do next week.
OK, well, that's interesting to hear you say that you thought he was in listening mode and that you're optimistic. Can I just ask you quickly, before I bring in another guest, about multi-annual budgets? Do you think that that's overplayed, or do you think... I mean, I'm just thinking there, you know, Deirdre Heenan was criticising the Minister for producing a plan without any targets in it. If, you know, is that not the same as saying that somebody who sits down and produces a financial spreadsheet without knowing what's coming down the tracks is equally dodging some of the hard decisions that need to be taken and hard facts that need to be faced up to?
I suppose when you come up with a plan, you align your budget to the plan. OK, and I don't know to the extent that that could be done without multi-year budgets. So I certainly believe that multi-year budgets are essential.
Essential?
I do.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, Mark, what's essential is to have a vision, to say this is where we're going, this is the direction of travel, this is the roadmap, this is how we're going to get there. What the language that we are being given is we're working towards, we have an ambition for. That's simply not good enough. It's how are you going to deliver this? When are you going to deliver it? And what will success look like? a quarter of the population here are sitting on a waiting list. And whilst we have discussed this individually, it's very important to say that health is important to the economy. If there are huge numbers of people here economically inactive, how on earth will we ever fix the economy?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting point. I want to just bring in another contributor now, Dr. Ciara Fitzpatrick from Ulster University's School of Law. Welcome to you, Ciara. And people will know, we've had you on the programme before, you deal with people at the sharp end of life. And I'm very conscious, as you will be too, that the latest Department for Communities statistics reported today show that over 5,300 children are living in temporary accommodation here in Northern Ireland. How well is Stormont dealing with the needs of people who find themselves living on the edge?
It's not dealing very well at all. And I'm going to focus tonight actually on children. We've seen that relative child poverty has risen from about 1 in 5 children in every classroom to 1 in 4 children. We have had no or very, very little progress on the end-to-end review of special educational needs provision. We've had legislation there from 2016, which is yet to be implemented. We have those huge numbers of children living in temporary accommodation. We have rising mental health issues, with a colleague, Professor Siobhan O'Neill, bemoaning the fact that, only a tiny piece of the budget that is required is going to be attributed to it, even though our suicide rates are among the worst across Europe. And one final thing I would mention is the childcare situation, where we have, a Barnett consequential of over 50 million attributed for childcare in Northern Ireland, and only under half of that was spent, and parents really are in crisis. Part of the reason for economic inactivity is because women, primarily women, cannot afford to go out to work because they cannot afford childcare, and there's something fundamentally wrong with that, without even going into the fact that, childcare and early education is a key.
Oh, we've lost Ciara. We'll see if we can re-establish that line with Ciara Fitzpatrick.
Ciara makes a really great point there about economic inactivity, and we look at the amount that we've got the highest in the UK and the highest on these islands. That's having such an impact on the economy and on filling jobs. Our jobs numbers are down. You'll sometimes get ministers round the table talking to you, Mark, and saying, oh, we've got such low unemployment. That's because most of the people are sitting under a different bracket, which is called economic inactivity, where they're getting different types of benefits. It's not about being positive or negative to the executive or the politicians. We know they all want to do the right for this place, but we must be demanding of better for the people in this place, including for small businesses as well. Ciara talked about the money that was ring-fenced for childcare. There was money ring-fenced to give discounts to rates, and it never happened for the small businesses, and that's not good enough.
I just want to bring Ciara Fitzpatrick back. We've re-established the line with her. And just to pick up on what you were saying, Ciara, we just your final thoughts just dropped off the line there. Areas like health, education, housing, transport, those are all issues that are linked in so many people's lives and experiences. They are, of course, managed by different executive departments with understandably different priorities. Do we need to see much more focus on a cross-departmental approach to tackling those problems? Is that part of the reason that big decisions aren't taken? Because we have a system of government which operates, frankly, in silos.
Absolutely. And I have been keeping a close eye, particularly on the Communities Committee and the Education Committee. And we have seen that, for example, the Children's Services Cooperation Act has barely been used at all. There's almost no cooperation across departments, and that is a key failure of government that we need to see improvement. If we cannot work together, if departments cannot work together, we are not going to make progress at all in terms of making our society better. And even just keeping up with progress that is being made in other parts of the UK, we are light years behind, and it's utterly depressing.
Ciara, thanks very much indeed. Glad we re-established that line, and good to hear your thoughts on the programme.
I think Ciara makes a really important point about the system of government here and our system of devolution, remembering that devolution was supposed to be a laboratory, that we would be able to see in real time what other people were doing, how they were spending their money, look at what we're doing, what bold moves have we made, what is our flagship policy. And of course, if people work in silos, there's a problem, but also a real issue here is scrutiny and a lack of scrutiny. And with the Honourable notable exception of Diane Dodds, you look at that health committee and say they don't actually know the questions to ask. They seem to be in this kind of shtick. Thank you very much for coming along. We've got to be able to interrogate people and say, if you're spending our taxpayers' money, how can we be assured that this money is being well spent? Where is the evidence? But instead, what we have is a chief executive from a trust coming along and saying people don't come to their appointments because they don't have enough money. Well, there are two things there. Firstly, where is the evidence to support such a claim? And secondly, if it were true, why aren't you looking to England where they've used AI to really address issues on waiting lists?
OK, well, scrutiny. It's interesting that you should raise that because it was reported last week that at a recent Executive Office Committee meeting there was a DUP MLA, clearly not an Irish language speaker, who sat through an evidence session in Irish with no headphones on to listen to the translation. Now, it's one specific example, but, you know, where was the scrutiny there? I mean, it's remarkable, and it was covered in the newspapers. Clearly there was no scrutiny in that particular incident. I mean, you don't have to comment on it, but it's out there in the public domain.
But it's outrageous.
You were just commenting on the silo.
Well, I was just going to make a point that, I mean, Ciara laid out, and it's damning, the child poverty issues in Northern Ireland. Child poverty does not feature in the programme for government once.
No.
Yeah,
you know, so there's another example of something that...
Clara, I wanted to just bring you in. You made some positive points there as well, but people will know that today Eddie Lynch stood down as Northern Ireland's Commissioner for Older People, and this morning he criticised the slow pace of change in politics here, the lack of decision-making. His successor still hasn't been appointed, even though the position was advertised in July. The Victims Commissioner role is currently still empty. That's nearly a year at this stage. We still don't have an Irish language or an Ulster British Commissioner in place. People will wonder why these decisions, which should be, you would imagine, pretty straightforward, aren't taken, can't be taken for some reason.
It's one of the biggest frustrations that certainly my members, in terms of businesses and indeed personally, there is no pace in anything that we do. Everything is too slow. I think somebody mentioned being over-governed. Absolutely, we're over-governed. We have to, I'm hoping that the reform and transformation that's talked about in the programme for government is actually delivered in 2025, because that's really what is going to shift the dial.
Yeah. So, Tina, just a final note from you. It's not just the politicians and their ability to make decisions. It's the system, is it?
It's the system. But
and
also,
the people who work in the system.
Well, interestingly, they say in the programme for government that the people that are running things are going to be the people that change things. Well, if you knew they were wrong anyway, are they the people? I'm not saying bring in Elon Musk, but I'm saying you might need some new expertise
just to be clear,
to support and help you with that. Go and get some experts in and go outside. Don't be inward focused with, you know, bring in other experts from around the world. People will come and help and actually give you a bit of good ideas, but also maybe you need to start to performance manage.
Okay.
Maybe you could imagine a storm and space programme.
Yeah, maybe you could.
Maybe we don't have time to go into that in any great detail. But anyway, look, we're out of time. Really interesting conversation. Thank you all very much indeed for coming in to join us tonight. Well, the cost of living, high levels of traffic congestion, problems with our wastewater infrastructure and future changes to agricultural inheritance law, providing some of the biggest talking points over the past few months. We've brought together three former Assembly members who deal with these issues day and daily in their new jobs. Nicola Mallon is a former infrastructure minister and is now head of trade and devolved policy at Logistics UK. John McAllister is a former deputy leader of the Ulster Unionist Party who's now a full-time dairy farmer, and Claire Bailey is a former Green Party leader who now chairs the Consumer Council. So welcome to all of you. Mercifully, you'll be glad to hear I'm not going to ask you about a potential space programme up at Stormont, because I think that's a step too far for any of us tonight without really thinking about it. And the idea of Elon Musk having any say in the internal affairs of Northern Ireland makes the mind rather boggle. But anyway, Nicola, welcome to you. It's nice to see you back here in a different capacity. Just to be clear to all of you, you're not here to speak on behalf of your current employers. You're here to share your insights as former Stormont insiders from the outside. So, is the devolution project working at the moment? That's the first question, Nicola Mallon.
It depends on how you define working, okay? And I think there was hope and optimism when the Executive and the Assembly came back in February of this year. Undoubtedly, that optimism is waning. And I think we have to be fair in our assessment. So if I look at infrastructure, progress has been made on the A5. This week there was an announcement on the A1. We've had publication of the All-Ireland Strategic Rail Review. But undoubtedly there are long-standing challenges that need to be dealt with. You mentioned wastewater infrastructure.
Which is a huge issue.
Huge, and it's inhibiting housing growth, it's inhibiting the economy. So it's a crucial issue that's been kicking around for a long time. So undoubtedly there are difficulties when it comes to addressing the long-standing problems.
OK, but here's the question. How much power, how much influence does one minister, the infrastructure minister, have over that particular issue? I mean, John O'Dowd spinning a lot of plates at the moment, but he can't be responsible for every pothole and every block drain the length and breadth of Northern Ireland.
No, he can't. And I have to say this, the infrastructure portfolio is a tough job.
It's huge.
You have a huge department touching on every single aspect of people's lives. It has been historically underfunded. And to make a success of it, you need to have strong collective leadership with an ambitious, long-term strategic view of what you want to see when it comes to infrastructure. That means taking it out of election cycles, that means depoliticising it, and that is not an easy job.
So I assume you waking up every morning and count your lucky stars that you're not still the infrastructure minister?
Well, it is certainly not high up on my Christmas wish list, Mark.
OK. John McAllister, is devolution working at the moment in your view? It's a while since you've been at Stormont, but I know you're a very keen observer of activities or lack of activity on the Hill.
Still keen. Look, I lived off it for a long time that it was all right when I left. But it's still good to see it up and running. I do think First and Deputy First Ministers have set a positive agenda. We have to remember, I suppose, where we've been over the last, say, from 2017 election. We had 3 years of nothing, then several years of really remote working during the pandemic, then back to nothing, and we're up and running. So a lot of those relationships have to be rebuilt, and we're building effectively from scratch again. So don't underestimate the challenges. Now, as regards working, a lot of the comments I agree with, and I've often said for years that one of our problems that we tend to have shared out power rather than power sharing. So we need the government and the Northern Ireland Executive to act as a collective, because it's the only way, with everybody putting their shoulders to the wheel, that we can address the big issues that Nicola talked about, whether it's water infrastructure or the challenge in our health service are just overwhelming. You need all of the executive to work and be what is the programme for government? What is the direction of travel? The old adage that, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, that seems to apply too much at times to an executive not having an agreed programme for government.
But whenever you hear those examples...
I was an MLA when it was last agreed.
Well, there you go. Whenever you hear those examples that I quoted just a few moments ago, no new Commissioner for Older People appointed on the day that the existing Commissioner is leaving his job, no new Victims Commissioner appointed, no Ulster British or Irish Language Commissioners in place, a DUP MLA who patently, obviously doesn't speak Irish, sitting in a scrutiny session, not able to listen to what's being said because he's not wearing the headphones that would give him the translation. Those are just small examples, but they do illuminate something about the system, do they not?
They do, and look, and I see them getting that level of maturity in to address those. But a lot of that does come back to rebuilding the relationships up between parties and people. Remember, both in the 16 and 17 Assembly election, we had huge changes. We went from 108 back to 90. We had huge changes in membership in those elections, and again in 2022. And we've lost a lot of those relationships. We've lost a lot of the experience of people building up. So it's getting back to some of that, building it up, having some level of respect to, even if, I'm in a committee and I don't speak Irish either, but that I would at least listen to the translation, that you could have some level of scrutiny. Getting up in our game and the level of questioning and scrutiny that is provided, I think that's hugely important. And, I've been a huge advocate of government and opposition, and I'm glad that the SDLP are providing an oppositional role. But also members, individual members, even they're in parties in government, on their committee role, have a scrutiny duty and role function to do, and it's lifting their eyes onto that.
Well, let's bring in Claire Bailey at that point, and we'll just pick up on that idea of the opposition. And I suppose Matthew O'Toole can be thankful to some extent to John McAllister for the job that he's currently doing, because it's John's private members' legislation that put that situation in place. I suppose you were effectively in the naughty corner as well when you were the Green Party leader up there. You were of an oppositional disposition, let's say. Is opposition working? Is it making things better? Is it making a difference, do you think?
I can't see any new conversations or any new avenues being channelled by the opposition. I see it's there. It was an option and it's been picked, and that was through your bill. But I think, I know it's called the naughty corner, I would call it the active corner, because usually you got a lot of the work coming from those backbenches, and maybe that's because we as backbenchers weren't in the executive, we weren't in executive parties either, so there was other options maybe to go round the system rather than work the system, and I don't know how anybody can pretend that the system is working. You know, this process of siloed multi-party power sharing executives isn't really designed for delivery. You know, and I think the important point Ciara made when she was speaking as well, even about the Children and Young People's Services Cooperation Bill, that was legislated for a long time ago by Stephen Agnew and could make a difference in terms of overcoming that siloed thinking just for delivery with children and young people, but still not being implemented. So there's something fundamentally wrong from that departmental silo way of governing with, and let's not forget, it has been with 5 parties, now with 3, 4 parties.
Is it better though? I think it was Claire Guinness who made this point. At least now, people like yourselves who are involved in lobbying and are involved in various boards and organisations, you can pick up the phone if you're lucky enough and speak to a locally elected minister with who is locally accountable. And obviously during the fallow periods at Stormont, during the various periods of hiatus, you weren't able to do that. There was a UK minister making decisions who wasn't necessarily here very often. So is that in itself an improvement that we shouldn't underplay?
Of course. I mean, it's always an improvement to have an executive in place and an assembly that's functioning. I mean, that's fundamental. It should never even be questioned. But I also look at Scotland and Wales. They're also devolved regional assemblies, and they function an awful lot more than we do here in Northern Ireland. So we have to really look at that power sharing, multi-party, executive, silo department system that we're trying to operate in. I think it's quite impossible, but that's not to say that delivery isn't possible, because of course it is. Because even on the backbenches, within just 2 years, because of the 6 years I was elected, 3 of those we didn't have an executive at all, and the institution was semi-collapsed. But yet within 2 years I was able to bring forward 2 pieces of legislation. So there are ways of going, but legislation on its own is not going to do it, because it's implementation and delivery. What
about that silo mentality? How big a problem is it? I mean, when you had ministerial responsibility at Stormont, was it something that you were acutely aware of? Do you think that more could be done to counter it?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that there's a fundamental challenge. And when you have a multi-party executive that like we do in Northern Ireland, it almost becomes a goal in itself to get an agreement. Just reaching an agreement is seen as an achievement. No, it shouldn't be. It should be about having a shared ambition for this place that still allows for your differences on the constitutional issue, but having that ambition for the economy, for the society, having strong collective leadership around that, identifying your priorities, and having the honest conversation with the public. These are our priorities, because explain the why, but also explain this means we will not be able to do X, Y, and Z.
And is that what politicians don't do enough of?
Absolutely no, they don't do enough.
Right.
And there is a wave of populism.
Are they frightened of the consequences of taking those difficult, potentially unpopular decisions?
Yes, I think that is an issue. I think it's not an issue just to Northern Ireland. I think it's an issue if you look at politics and a wave of populism right across the board. But the issue is that we need to get out of election cycles, and there needs to be greater ambition. We can all sit here and comment till the cows come home, but this fundamentally comes down to the electorate. The people of Northern Ireland, when they go to the polls, they decide who to reward and who to punish.
Yeah.
And the fundamental question is, if parties keep going back, they keep getting a strong vote. So fundamentally, there's an issue around the political system, there's an issue around the civil service, but there's also an issue about the public's expectations and aspirations of
But the
its
good
elected
thing, as far as that's
representatives.
concerned, is that we actually are out of the election cycle at the moment, because the next elections in Northern Ireland are 2027. So we've got 2 full years ahead of us with no elections, or no scheduled elections, maybe I should say.
Yeah, and
so
it comes back
that's
to
a
the
good
issue.
thing,
It is, but it comes back to the issue of single-year budgets. If you look at infrastructure, you can't take strategic decisions if you're just trying to manage single-year budgets. So part of the answer has to be taken the multi-year budget
So
approach.
3 of our 4 panellists said that the issue of multi-year budgets is overplayed. Are you saying that it's not? It's absolutely essential.
They're saying it's overplayed. I'm saying that it's a really important element if you're taking a strategic long-term approach, because if you're just working from one year to the next, it encourages short-termism, it encourages short-sightedness, and that is not in the best interests of the people of Northern Ireland.
John, can I ask you about the relationship between politicians and civil servants? Well, I suppose ministers in particular and civil servants, because we heard a little clip there of the Health Minister Mike Nesbitt in conversation with me on the programme a couple of months ago, talking about frosty conversations that he has had to have with senior civil servants in his department. Is that a good thing? Are frosty conversations a good thing or a bad thing in your view?
They probably are having... it's probably good that there is a challenge function there. The difficulty probably in the context that Mike Nesbitt might be talking about is that the permanent secretary is the accounting officer for that department. So even if Minister Nesbitt wants to overspend or doesn't want to stay within the constraints of the allocated budget, it's the permanent secretary is actually the accounting officer for that for the budget. And so there will be a frosty tension there between how that's delivered. I suppose the difficulty is, you know, have the politicians got a vision on where they want to go and to drive that? Or the civil service, is there the capacity there within the civil service?
You're giving that as an example. There's no evidence in what Mike said that's what he was specifically talking about there.
I just know that's where the tension.
Yes, it's an illustration, but he could have been talking about something else. I think he was also referring to just his desire to see things done differently and more efficiently, and the system saying, in effect, I'm paraphrasing, you know, computer says no, this is the way we do it and we can't change. There's quite a bit of that around, isn't there?
There's been no evidence, like for a long time, that we've really been able to grapple with any level of reform of the health service in Northern Ireland, and hence our waiting lists, you know, even looking at expenditure, our waiting lists are still way out of kilter with the rest of the UK.
Yeah. Do you think this place can change? Do you think we can do things better, more efficiently, more effectively, and that our politicians at any stage will say, look, we've got to make, maybe they will over the next 2 years when they don't have to worry about the electorate, there are difficult decisions we need to take on your behalf because the outcome ultimately will be better, but you've got to trust us on this when we say in the short term you might not like it.
Look,
Do you need to hear more of that?
I'm always hopeful. We can change, we can develop, we can progress, we absolutely can. And we've seen it happen. When we look at the changes that we have seen coming, even just in rights and recognition for marriage equality, for abortion reform, for all these big social issues that we have been able to do. It wasn't politicians that did it, though. It was civic society, and it was the big campaign. And when you turn something like that into a voting matter, then you get the attention of the politicians an awful lot better. So when we're talking about child poverty, for example, you know, even at the Consumer Council, we would keep an income and expenditure tracker. And the difference between the 4 quartiles of the lowest income household disposable spend on a weekly basis is £50, as opposed to nearly 700 in the highest. Now, that's a huge disparity. So we still don't have a poverty strategy, for example. So if we could find a way to mobilise civic society to put the pressure, but give permission to politicians that this is a voting matter and you support us and we'll support you, and bring in that participation, because I think that's the real missing link.
OK, very quickly, yes, no. Nobody ever said that Stormont was going to be a silver bullet, but are you optimistic? Yes, no.
Well, I always be optimistic, yeah.
Yeah. John?
Yes, I'm optimistic and glad to see it there.
OK, Claire?
Better than any other alternative.
OK, all right. We need to leave it there, folks. Really good to have you on board. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. That is it for tonight and indeed for this year. The View will be back in January, and of course this weekend Sunday Politics will be here at 10 o'clock on BBC One and iPlayer. For now though, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching, and from all of us, have a happy and peaceful Christmas. Bye-bye.